conservation easements slowly erode away over time. So I wonder, in terms of places like that, who is going to be doing the oversight? And is the money going to be provided to whatever that entity happens to be, Sierra Club or the county or whatever, that's going to sustain the ability to keep on top of conservation easements? I have no answers, but I have concerns.
Go ahead.
Well, I have to say I am not a particular fan of having a zoning pattern of one house for every 5 acres. If you want something that will assure urban sprawl, that will do it. Conversely, I'm a big advocate of the new town movement, which was referred to earlier, and which has been a very successful movement in many places in Europe, particularly in Scandinavia and the United Kingdom, but has sort of petered out in the United States. And it seems to me it is an ideal strategy for Florida, because what it does is it concentrates development in specific areas and has within those areas all of the activities that human beings normally require, so that you diminish the need for extensive transportation. And then you can preserve the land that's outside the perimeter of those affected. If you ever are on an airplane flying across a place like Sweden or Denmark, you can see it dramatically by looking down, and you'll see a concentration of development and then forest and pasture land for the next 10 or 20 miles. That to me is a picture I'd like someday to be able to see in Florida.
Well, you mentioned it's also evident in the United Kingdom. The New Town movement in the United Kingdom was significant in terms of preserving open space for both open space and agriculture. And I think sometimes this program is too loosely drafted for Florida's future. I think the concentration of new, I wrote a paper, gosh, 85 years, not 85, about 60 years ago, that had that proposed new towns in South Florida. Senator Graham may remember it. And I had looked at Dade County and I said, here's some things, and here's some transportation connected. And that's what we ought to do, is concentrate development in these little communities, and these sometimes very large communities. But I think this rural land thing is very serious, and I think it's a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Julian, and then Richard.
Good evening, Governor. You will always be my governor. Julian Perez, and good evening to my professor, Dick RuBino, and the gentleman. Tremendous presentation, read a tremendous amount of history. Very fortunate that I was part of it. Very fortunate that I studied under RuBino and later was an employee of Governor Graham, and the days when we were putting together the Save Our Everglades program, and then later on the Save Our Keys, and many things that group of young planners that you brought on board, attorneys and economists at that time, and our friend Jim Murray was also part of that too. My question to you, Governor Graham, Senator Graham, is how do you see the history of the SERP program as it relates to the federal government?
The history of the SERP, the Everglades Restoration Program. Well, I'll give the history and then what was sort of the policy behind the history. The history was that the Save the Everglades program started as a state initiative, and it began with the realization that if there was going to be any serious effort to save the Everglades, it was going to require a substantial amount of public acquisition of the land that was critical to protecting the Everglades. And the first big acquisition was the Big Cypress area, about 300,000 or 400,000 acres, 240,000. I exaggerated. It's a damn big piece of land. But it was also recognized that this was not a project that the state of Florida was going to be able to carry to fruition alone. First, the cost, Second, the authorities that were going to be required, and some of the capabilities that would be required only exist in the federal government. So over a period of almost a decade, and I might say one of the happiest periods of my life in politics was serving with Connie Mack. Connie was a Republican, I was a Democrat. We disagreed on some things, but on things that related to Florida like this, we had a very close relationship built around the principle that the important thing was to get the job done, not who got credit for getting the job done. And we brought the federal government in as a 50-50 partner in 2000, 50-50 in terms of financing and in terms of the decision making. Now, since 2000, several things have happened. One, the way the system in the federal government works for a project like the various projects that make up the Restoration of the Everglades, they first have to be authorized and then they have to be funded. And the authorization became the subject of a lot of political disagreement having nothing to do with the Everglades, everything to do with dams on the Missouri River. And for a period of 6 years, we couldn't get any of our projects authorized, and therefore the federal government fell behind. The state had to step in. I want to congratulate Governor Bush for taking some of the initiatives that kept the thing alive while the federal government was effectively sitting on the sidelines. Now the federal government is moving again. There will be in this appropriations bill that's going to pass the Congress in the next couple of weeks, I think $200 or $300 million for the Everglades. So I hope that this relationship is now getting back on track.
Richard, do you have a question?
Richard Grosso with the Everglades Law Center and the Law School at Southeastern University. The planning experts know that things you described for us, the growth in general doesn't pay for itself, and that things like new town planning, if done just right, can work. But yet, the dominant policy player on these issues is the Florida legislature. Is the Florida legislature as a body, how it's elected, how it's run, up to the task of surgically implementing the kinds of changes that we know we need to make to growth management before it's too late?
We know that Florida legislatures can be up to the task, because that has happened a number of times in the past, particularly the early 1970s and also the early and mid-1980s. No question that they were capable at that particular point in time and interested in.
We refer to that as the golden or
platinum, all of that, yes indeed. In terms of facing your question and saying about this particular one, I don't think the one in Tallahassee right now is of the same ilk by far. I will hope that in this particular sort of a period, and this is someone raised it, I think it might have been you, Senator, it's a time of opportunity. And opportunity brings an opportunity for change. And maybe not this year, but maybe in a year or two, because we might visualize or see and experience that change.
Richard, in part to answer your question, I think the legislature must have executive leadership from the executive office of the governor. And I don't see that happening today, unfortunately. But I think that is very critical. Every time we have moved through this whole series of planning developments, there's been a strong executive leadership and sufficient numbers of legislators who are interested in that issue to make it work. And I don't see that today.
As moderator, I'd like to ask the last question, segueing off of what Earl said about a strong executive. It's been my observation we appear to have a new, strong executive in Washington, D.C. And we have action of a legislative body at that direction to try to address the significant problems we're having. We have Floridians like Carol Browner in the White House in very important positions. What should we as Floridians be trying to do to encourage our state government and our local governments to do? How can we take advantage of this opportunity with the change? Our president says the time for sprawl is over, that we need to do regional transportation planning. He's even saying this in complete sentences. I just feel that, you know, it's a huge opportunity that we need to take advantage of. We've got the Everglades as one base center. We have, we're the fourth or third largest state. We need to have some targets to take advantage of, it seems to me. So I would love if you would share with the audience your, albeit at this point, initial thoughts about how we could work with the federal government on important issues.
Well, let me say something good about Governor Christ after that vicious attack. I think he's made some very good appointments to the South Florida Water Management District, and I say that not just because there happen to be some current members in the audience, but and I think he is prepared to give the support to the state part of that 50-50 partnership. Second, I think that he got some big political chits this last few days as he was one of the few Republican governors who actually publicly supported the president's economic plan, as opposed to those who either stayed on the sidelines or those who are retreating deep into the locker room on the stimulus. So I think we've got some goodwill there. I think the key is, it's a little bit like what happened in the early 70s. If people like John DeGrove hadn't been thinking about what to do, the fact that we needed to have, we only had 2 water management districts in Florida, one down here and the other one on the southwest part of the state, that we needed to have a statewide comprehensive water management policy. That the state needed to have some authorities to deal with these big development projects that affected more than a single county, and to designate places like the Keys where the local government had not demonstrated its ability to effectively manage. Those were all well-developed, mature ideas, which then met the opportunity of the Great Fire of 70-71 and the leadership of people like Ruben Askew and John DeGrove.